You know what? Since you're so eager to play with the big girls, let's see if you actually belong here. Ashley Kronwell's voice dripped with venom as she circled the quiet Nigerian teenager like a predator savoring its prey. The Beverly Hills gym fell silent, every conversation stopping mid-sentence as the reigning world champion prepared to destroy another soul for her entertainment. A friendly sparring session, 3 rounds. You and me. Kemi stood perfectly still, her worn sneakers squeaking softly against the pristine marble floor. Everyone expected her to cry, to beg, to shrink away from this moment that would validate every cruel assumption they'd made about her. Instead, she looked directly into Ashley's eyes and spoke 2 words that would change everything. I accept. In that moment, no one in the elite gymnasium could have imagined they were about to witness the fall of a champion and the rise of a storm that had been brewing for 19 years. The pristine marble floors of elite performance boxing reflected the California sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that cost more than most people's cars. This wasn't just a gym, it was a monument to wealth and privilege, where monthly memberships ran $12,000 and every piece of equipment gleamed like jewelry in a Rodeo Drive boutique. Ashley Kronwell stood in the center ring like a queen surveying her domain. At 28, she was more than just the undefeated women's world boxing champion. She was a carefully crafted brand worth $40 million. Her platinum blonde hair fell in perfect waves, even after 2 hours of training, her makeup artist having touched up her face between rounds to ensure every Instagram story looked flawless. Her social media empire boasted 3.2 million followers who devoured every carefully curated post about her naturally superior lifestyle. Her latest upload, a slow-motion video of her devastating a heavy bag with the caption, "When you reborn elite, mediocrity becomes allergic to you," had already garnered 800,000 likes in 3 hours. The morning had been routine until the heavy bag chains clinked to a halt and every head turned toward the entrance like flowers following sunlight. Kemi stepped through the glass doors that cost more than her family's annual income back in Lagos. Her worn Adidas bag, inherited from her older brother who'd outgrown his dreams of football stardom, hung from her shoulder like a badge of her circumstances. Her sneakers purchased from a thrift store in Long Beach and carefully maintained with household glue and determination squeaked against the polished floor with each hesitant step. At 19, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned that survival often depended on making herself invisible. The exhaustion from her double-shift cleaning office buildings in downtown L.A. clung to her shoulders like a familiar weight. But her dark eyes held something that money couldn't buy and privilege couldn't understand. Unshakable purpose. Well, well, well. Ashley's voice cut through the rarefied air like a blade dipped in acid. She descended from the ring with theatrical precision, each step calculated for maximum psychological impact. Looks like someone took a very wrong turn. The community center is about 15 miles that way, sweetheart. Though I doubt they want you showing up looking like that. The words landed like physical blows. Every person in the gym felt the cruelty, from the personal trainers, who charged $300 per hour, to the trust fund kids who treated boxing like an expensive hobby. The silence stretched taut as a wire, threatening to snap under the weight of barely contained tension. Kemi checked the address on her cracked phone screen, device she bought secondhand and nursed through 2 years of careful use. Her dark eyes scanned the intimidation that surrounded her. Crystal water dispensers that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Leather seating areas where the wealthy discussed their problems between sets. Walls lined with photos of champions who all seemed to share the same privileged background. "I'm looking for the youth development program," Kemi said softly, her slight Nigerian accent coloring the words with musical undertones that only seemed to fuel Ashley's predatory smile. "Youth development?" Ashley threw back her head and laughed, a sound like champagne flutes shattering against marble. "Oh, honey, this isn't a charity case. We develop actual champions here, not social experiments." She gestured dismissively at Kemi's appearance. "This is where real athletes train, not where we babysit kids who've never seen the inside of a proper facility." The word proper hung in the air like a noose, carrying implications that made everyone present shift uncomfortably. It wasn't just about the gym. It was about who belonged in spaces like this, who deserved access to excellence, who was worthy of investment. Actually, she's exactly where she needs to be. The voice belonged to Frank Moretti, who emerged from his office like an old gladiator stepping back into the arena. At 67, his weathered face told stories of 5 decades in boxing from his days as a promising middleweight in Brooklyn to his transformation into one of the most respected trainers on the West Coast. His calloused hands, scarred knuckles, and careful gait spoke of a man who had earned every lesson the hard way. Frank had purchased elite performance boxing 3 years earlier, not as a vanity project like so many wealthy dilettantes, but as a final chapter in a career dedicated to the sweet science. The youth development program had been his ideal way to get back to kids who reminded him of his younger self. Growing up poor in Red Hook when boxing wasn't a lifestyle choice but a necessity. Frank? Ashley's voice transformed instantly, taking on the honey tone she reserved for people who could affect her career trajectory. Her smile became a weapon of seduction rather than destruction. Please don't tell me you returning my training facility into some kind of social outreach program. My sponsors expect a certain standard of excellence. She emphasized the last 3 words like a politician delivering a campaign promise. Each syllable carefully weighed with implied threats about contracts, endorsements, and the delicate ecosystem of professional boxing that could make or break careers with a single phone call. Your sponsors pay for results, not your opinions about who deserves a chance to earn them, Frank replied, his Brooklyn accent cutting through Ashley's California polish like sandpaper against silk. His voice carried the authority of someone who had trained world champions back when boxing was still a sport instead of a social media performance. But Ashley wasn't finished. She had built her career on more than just athletic ability. She was a master of psychological warfare, capable of destroying opponents mentally before they ever stepped into the ring. Her cruelty was as calculated as her combinations, designed to break spirits before breaking bodies. She approached Kemi with the predatory grace of a hunter who had never encountered prey that might fight back. Each step was measured, her posture radiating the confidence of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. You know what? Ashley's smile was all teeth and malice, an expression she had perfected through years of practice in front of mirrors and cameras. Since you're so eager to play with the big girls, let's see if you actually belong here. The gym's atmosphere shifted like barometric pressure before a hurricane. Conversations died mid-sentence, equipment stopped moving, and even the air conditioning seemed to quiet as everyone sensed the approaching storm. A friendly sparring session, Ashley continued, savoring every syllable like expensive wine. 3 rounds, you and me. Right here, right now. She gestured toward the ring with theatrical flourish, her movements calculated for maximum drama. This wasn't just a challenge. It was a public execution disguised as sport, designed to humiliate Kemi so thoroughly that she would never again dare to enter spaces where she wasn't wanted. If you can last 3 rounds with me, Ashley's voice rose so everyone in the gym could hear clearly, you can stay and play with your little scholarship program. But when you can't, she made a dismissive gesture with her perfectly manicured hand, the diamonds on her training gloves catching the light like tiny stars. Well, at least you, LL, have a story to tell your friends about the day you learned the difference between dreaming and belonging. The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone present understood they were witnessing more than a simple challenge. They were seeing the intersection of privilege and prejudice, the moment when years of systematic exclusion would be validated through violence. Kemi felt the weight of every stare, the expectations of failure that pressed against her chest like a physical force. The script had been written before she ever walked through those glass doors. She was supposed to cry, to beg for mercy, to shrink away from this moment and validate every assumption they had made about her worthiness. Instead, she set down her worn bag with deliberate care and looked directly into Ashley's eyes, not with defiance, but with something far more unsettling. Complete calm. I accept. While Ashley was already mentally composing her Instagram story, About to teach some humility to an amateur who doesn't know her place Frank Moretti found. Himself studying the young woman who had just accepted what amounted to professional suicide with the serenity of someone accepting an invitation to tea. There was something in Kemi's posture that defied logic, a stillness that reminded him of the deadliest fighters he had ever encountered in 5 decades around the sport. Not the showy, aggressive stance of someone trying to intimidate through bluster, but the centered calm of a predator who had nothing left to prove because they had already proven everything that mattered. Her hands hung loosely at her sides. But Frank's experienced eye caught details that others miss. The slight calluses on her knuckles that spoke of impact, the way her weight distributed evenly across both feet despite her casual stance, the micro movements that suggested muscle memory carved from years of necessity rather than choice. "Kemi," Frank said quietly, approaching her with the careful respect he reserved for fighters who carried themselves like loaded weapons. "You don't have to do this. The program will still be here tomorrow, and there are other ways to prove you belong." "No, Mr. Moretti," she replied, her voice carrying a certainty that made him pause mid-step. "There won't be a tomorrow for this program or for anyone else like me if people like her are allowed to decide who deserves chances and who doesn't." Her words carried the weight of prophecy, as if she were revealing not just her own motivation, but the fundamental truth that would determine everyone's fate in the next hour. The gym's front door chimed with the sound of expensive metal against reinforced glass, and a man in his 50s entered with the bearing of someone who had learned to read danger in the subtlest shifts of human behavior. Uncle Obina moved through the crowd with purposeful steps, his weathered face scanning the scene until his eyes landed on his niece. He had driven 2 hours from his auto repair shop in Riverside. As soon as he received the panicked phone call from one of their mutual friends, someone who had recognized Kemi in a video already beginning to circulate on social media, and understood the implications of what was about to happen. "Adamide," he called out, using Kemi's full first name, the one that meant the crown has come to stay in Yoruba. The effect was instantaneous and electric. Several of the older boxers looked up sharply, recognition flickering in their eyes like distant lightning. The name carried weight in certain circles, connected to stories that most people dismissed as urban legends until they saw the proof standing before them. "Uncle Obina," Kemi said, her voice betraying the first hint of vulnerability since she had arrived at the gym. "What are you doing here?" "I heard through the network," he replied in English colored by decades of living between 2 continents, his accent carrying the musical cadences of his homeland mixed with the hard consonants of American urban life. "Someone said Storm was about to step back into a ring." The nickname fell into the room like a stone into still water, creating ripples of whispered recognition among those old enough to remember the underground videos that had circulated through boxing communities worldwide before mysteriously disappearing from the internet. Ashley, still recording her social media content and basking in the attention of her growing audience, laughed without looking up from her phone. "Storm? Really? What kind of ridiculous street name is that? Did you watch too much anime growing up, or shut your mouth?" The voice belonged to Miguel Santos, a former WBC middleweight champion who trained at Elite Performance 3 days a week to stay in shape for his commentary work with HBO. His words carried the quiet authority of someone who had earned respect through blood, sweat, and the accumulated wisdom of 15 years as a professional fighter. Miguel's weathered face had gone pale, his expression shifting from casual interest to something approaching reverence mixed with fear. He had been one of the few people to see the original footage before it vanished from YouTube, videos that had been passed between fighters like underground treasures, watched and rewatched until every detail was burned into memory. "You have no idea what you just stepped into," Miguel continued, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly through the suddenly silent gym. Ashley finally looked up from her phone, something in Miguel's tone cutting through her arrogance like a cold wind. "What are you talking about?" "She's just some cleaning lady who thinks she can." 5 years ago, Miguel interrupted, his eyes never leaving Kemi's face. There were videos. Underground fights from Lagos, street competitions that made our professional matches look like sparring sessions between children. He paused, choosing his words carefully, as if he were describing something holy and terrible. There was this fighter, just a kid, really maybe 16 or 17, who moved like she could see 3 seconds into the future. They called her Storm because by the time you realized she was dangerous, the fight was already over. Frank approached Uncle Obinna with the careful curiosity of a man who had spent his life around fighters, but rarely encountered true legends in their raw form. "You know her? You trained her? Know her?" Uncle Obinna's laugh was deep and rich, tinged with pride and old pain that spoke of sacrifices made and prices paid in the currency of blood and survival. "I trained her from the time she was 8 years old. Not for sport, not for trophies or recognition, for survival in its purest form." He looked around the pristine gym with its expensive equipment and climate-controlled comfort, his expression carrying the weight of someone who had seen what human beings were capable of when desperation met opportunity. "She started fighting," Uncle Obinna continued, his voice carrying the gravity of shared secrets, "because it was either that or watch her family starve. Her father had been injured in a construction accident, couldn't work anymore. Her mother was selling everything they owned just to keep food on the table." Ashley stopped recording. Something in the older man's tone, penetrating even her carefully constructed bubble of narcissistic invulnerability. By 12 years old, she was beating boys twice her size in underground matches that paid enough money to keep a dozen people fed for another week. But it wasn't about the violence. Storm was never about brutality or domination. Uncle Obinna's eyes found Kemi across the gym, and his expression softened with paternal love mixed with old grief. She was about precision, about ending fights so quickly and decisively that word would spread, and her reputation would protect not just her family, but other vulnerable people in the neighborhood. When gang members knew that Storm Campbell lived on the street, they found somewhere else to cause their trouble. Frank felt his understanding of the situation shift like tectonic plates realigning after an earthquake. Everything he thought he knew about the quiet young woman who had applied for his scholarship program was crumbling, replaced by something that defied every assumption he had made. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" Frank asked, his voice carrying equal parts hurt and bewilderment. "Because I came to America to leave that life behind," Kemi said quietly, her words carrying across the gym with startling clarity. "I swore I would never fight again. I wanted to build something clean, something new, something that didn't require violence to maintain dignity." She paused, her gaze shifting between Ashley's increasingly uncertain expression and the growing crowd of spectators, who were beginning to understand. They might be witnessing something far more significant than a simple mismatch. "I wanted to prove that people like me could succeed through hard work and education, that we didn't need our fists to earn respect in this country. I wanted to be the kind of immigrant success story that made people proud instead of afraid." "Then why now?" Frank asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Kemi looked across the gym at Ashley, who had finally stopped her social media performance and was listening despite herself, her perfectly constructed confidence beginning to show hairline cracks. "Because some people think that our kindness is weakness," Kemi replied, her voice carrying an edge that made even the most experienced fighters in the room pay attention. "They think that our desire for peace means we've forgotten how to wage war. And sometimes, the only way to protect the next person who walks through that door is to remind everyone why certain names become legends." The bell's metallic cry pierced the afternoon air, sharp and final as a judge's gavel, and Ashley Cromwell exploded forward like a woman possessed by her own invincibility. Her training had been built on the foundation of overwhelming smaller, weaker opponents, early using her professional technique, superior conditioning, and psychological dominance to break their spirit before breaking their will to continue. Her opening combination was textbook perfection, the kind of sequence that had been drilled into her muscle memory through thousands of hours of elite-level training. Jab to establish distance and timing, cross to the body to slow her opponent's movement, hook to the head to announce her. Intentions, each punch thrown with the mechanical precision of someone who had performed this exact sequence against world-class opposition. But Kemi Adelic wasn't there. Ashley's perfectly executed combination sliced through empty air as Kemi moved like liquid shadow, her feet seeming to barely touch the canvas as she flowed around each incoming punch with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to dance with violence from childhood. The crowd's expectant murmur died in the confused silence as they watched Ashley's professional technique combinations that would have destroyed amateur opponents connect with nothing but the ghost of where Kemi had been a heartbeat before. "What the hell?" Ashley muttered, her perfect form suddenly feeling clumsy and predictable as she found herself punching air where her opponent should have been. That was when Kemi struck back. The counterpunch came from an angle that defied Ashley's understanding of boxing geometry, left hook that seemed to materialize from nowhere, connecting with the side of Ashley's jaw with a sound like a baseball bat hitting a watermelon. The impact reverberated through the gym like a gunshot, causing several spectators to flinch involuntarily. For the first time in her professional career, Ashley felt her legs betray her, stumbling backward as her world tilted sideways and her perfect balance abandoned her completely. The crowd's intake of breath was audible, a collective gasp of disbelief that echoed off the gymnasium's expensive walls. "Impossible," Ashley whispered, touching her jaw with her glove, feeling the immediate swelling that spoke of damage she had never experienced from an opponent. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth, not from a cut, but from the way her teeth had clicked together under the impact. But Kemi was already moving again, flowing around Ashley's desperate attempts at recovery like water flowing around stones in a riverbed. Every movement was economical, purposeful, beautiful in its deadly efficiency, the kind of natural fighting ability that couldn't be taught in any gym, no matter how expensive. Uncle Obina watched from ringside, his weathered face showing no surprise at what the crowd was witnessing. "In Lagos," he murmured to Frank, who stood beside him with growing amazement. They called her Storm not because she was fast, but because she could read the fight 3 moves ahead of her opponent. He paused, watching his niece slip another of Ashley's increasingly frantic combinations with the ease of someone avoiding raindrops. By the time you realized what was happening, the storm had already passed through your defenses, and you were lying on the ground wondering where the lightning came from. Ashley, desperation beginning to replace her earlier confidence, tried to use her size and reach advantages, throwing long, pawing jabs designed to keep distance between herself and this opponent who didn't seem to follow any of the rules she understood about boxing. But fighting Kemi was like trying to box smoke. She was always exactly where Ashley wasn't expecting her to be, always one step ahead of every strategic adjustment Ashley tried to make. The second round began with Ashley's corner screaming instructions, her manager Jerry's voice cracking with panic, as he began to realize that his carefully constructed meal ticket was in serious trouble against an opponent who wasn't even supposed to be competitive. "Ashley, use your jab. Control the distance. Don't let her inside." Jerry's voice carried the desperation of someone watching years of investment potentially crumble in real time. But Kemi wasn't interested in following anyone else's script or accommodating their expectations about how this fight should unfold. She moved with the fluid confidence of someone who had learned to fight not in gyms with rules, referees, and safety equipment, but in places where losing meant genuine consequences that extended far beyond athletic embarrassment. Her combinations were surgical, each punch placed with the precision of someone who couldn't afford to waste energy on anything that wouldn't contribute to ending the confrontation decisively. Ashley's face began to swell, her Instagram-perfect features distorting as Kemi systematically dismantled not just her physical defenses, but her entire sense of superiority and invulnerability. Each clean shot that landed carried more than just physical impact. It carried the accumulated weight of every assumption Ashley had made about her own natural supremacy. The third round began with Ashley desperate and angry, abandoning technique entirely in favor of wild, emotional fighting. She charged forward with looping haymakers, relying on brute force and the accumulated fury of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. That desperate abandonment of technique was exactly what Kemi had been waiting for. She stepped inside Ashley's wild swing with the timing of someone who had learned to dance. with much more dangerous partners and a frustrated boxer having her first genuinely difficult fight. What happened next unfolded so quickly that the spectators would need to replay their phone footage in slow motion to understand what they had witnessed. 4 punches, less than 2 seconds. Each one placed with the precision of a surgeon and the power of someone who had never been allowed the luxury of holding back. Jab to establish distance and timing. Cross to the solar plexus that folded Ashley forward like a closing book. Uppercut that snapped her head back with whiplash force. And finally, a left hook that connected with Ashley's temple and sent the undefeated world champion crashing to the canvas like a demolished building. The gym exploded into chaos, people screaming, cheering, filming everything for social media posts that would reshape both women's lives forever. But Kemi stood in the center of the ring, as calm as if she were waiting for a bus, not celebrating or gloating, simply present in a way that made everyone else feel like background noise in her story. Ashley tried to rise, her world swimming in and out of focus as her brain attempted to process what had just happened to her. But her legs had abandoned her completely, refusing to respond to commands that her equilibrium couldn't support. For the first time in her life, the woman who had built a career on humiliating others found herself staring up at the ceiling, completely and utterly defeated, not just physically, but existentially. 10, Frank counted, his voice carrying the weight of finality that marked the end of more than just a fight. The silence that followed the count was deafening, pregnant with implications that extended far beyond the boundaries of sport into questions of worth, respect, and the true nature of strength. Kemi walked calmly to where Ashley lay, offering her hand to help her rise, a gesture of class that somehow made the devastation even more complete. When Ashley looked into her eyes, she saw not cruelty or vindication, but something far more devastating to her sense of self, genuine pity. "You said you wanted to teach me about my place," Kemi said quietly, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the now silent gymnasium. "I hope you learned something about yours." The video went viral within hours, spreading across social media platforms with the unstoppable force of a natural disaster. Not the carefully crafted content Ashley had planned to post her usual narrative of superiority and dominance over inferior competition, but shaky phone footage captured by spectators who couldn't believe what they were witnessing. The clip showed Ashley's arrogant pre-fight comments, followed by 3 rounds of systematic dismantling that ended with her unconscious on the canvas, while her conqueror stood over her with serene dignity. The internet's response was swift and merciless. Within 24 hours, Ashley had lost 200,000 followers as her social media empire began crumbling under the weight of public ridicule. Within a week, her major sponsors had canceled contracts worth millions of dollars. Nike, who had paid her 8 figures for their Unstoppable Force campaign, issued a public statement distancing themselves from attitudes and behaviors that don't align with our corporate values of respect, inclusion, and authentic excellence. Meanwhile, Kemi returned to her job cleaning offices in downtown LA, but everything in her world had fundamentally changed. The fight video had been viewed over 15 million times across all platforms, and offers were pouring in from promoters, managers, and brands who wanted to associate themselves with the woman who had become an overnight symbol of authentic strength triumphing over artificial privilege. Golden Gloves Promotions offered her a contract worth $8 million for her first 3 professional fights, with performance escalators that could push the total value above $20 million. Under Armour wanted to build an entire campaign around her story. ESPN begged for exclusive interview rights, offering 6 figures just for her to tell her story on camera. "I don't understand the hesitation," Frank said as they sat in his office 3 days after the fight, stacks of contracts covering his desk like fallen leaves. "You could make more money in 1 year than most people see in a lifetime. You could change your family's entire economic situation forever." Kemi stared out the window at the Beverly Hills traffic, her reflection ghost-like in the tinted glass. The weight of sudden fame pressed against her chest like a physical force, making it difficult to breathe in the way she had grown accustomed to over the past 2 years of deliberate invisibility. "Because once I signed that contract, I stopped being Kemi who cleans offices and dreams of a quiet life, she replied slowly, choosing each word with careful precision. I become Storm forever. I become the story, the symbol, the thing that people point to when they want to talk about overcoming adversity. She paused, watching a Tesla pull up to the valet stand outside, the kind of casual luxury that had once seemed as distant as the moon, but now appeared within her grasp. And that scares you? Frank asked gently. It doesn't scare me, she replied thoughtfully. It saddens me. I came to America to escape violence, to build something peaceful and sustainable. I wanted to prove that people like me could succeed through education and hard work, that we didn't need dramatic stories or spectacular displays to earn our place. She turned from the window to face him directly, her eyes carrying the weight of someone forced to make decisions that would echo through generations. But maybe some of us are meant to be storms. Maybe our peace comes from ensuring that others don't have to fight the battles we fought, that they don't have to prove their worth through violence, because we already proved it for them. Uncle Obinna had flown in from Riverside the day after the fight, bringing with him stories of how the video had spread through Nigerian communities worldwide like wildfire. Young girls in Lagos were sharing clips on social media with captions like, "This is what we're capable of, and never let them make you small again. You've become more than a boxer," he told his niece as they walked along Long Beach Pier, watching the sun paint the Pacific in shades of gold and crimson. "You've become a symbol of something larger than sport." "I never wanted to be a symbol, Uncle," Kemi replied, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had never asked for public attention, but found herself thrust into its unforgiving spotlight. "I wanted to be invisible, to succeed quietly without becoming anyone's inspiration or cautionary tale." "But Storm," he said, using the name that had followed her across an ocean and through years of determined reinvention, "some people aren't allowed to be invisible. The world sees our skin, our accents, our circumstances, and decides who we are before we even open our mouths." He gestured toward a group of young Black and Latina girls practicing boxing moves on the beach, their movements clearly inspired by videos they had watched online, their faces bright with possibility that hadn't existed a week earlier. When someone like you proves them wrong so dramatically, so publicly, you give others permission to be great. You show them that the limitations they've accepted aren't natural laws. They're artificial barriers that can be shattered by someone willing to pay the price. 3 months later, after weeks of careful negotiation and soul-searching that kept her awake most nights, Kemi signed with Golden Gloves Promotions. But her contract came with conditions that had never been seen in professional boxing terms. That reflected her understanding that true victory extended far beyond personal success. 50% of her purse would go directly to funding boxing programs in underserved communities across America and Nigeria. Her training camps would be open to young fighters who couldn't afford traditional coaching, creating a pipeline of opportunity for the next generation. Most importantly, she would never speak with disrespect about any opponent, regardless of how they spoke about her, maintaining the dignity that had become her trademark. "Class," she explained to the sports reporters who questioned her unusual contract demands during her first professional press conference, "isn't something you lose when others treat you without it. It's something you keep, especially when they don't deserve it, because maintaining your character is more important than matching their lack of it." Ashley Cromwell watched that press conference from her studio apartment in North Hollywood, the mansion and luxury cars long since sold to pay legal fees and mounting debts. The woman who had once commanded millions in endorsement deals was now working at a local gym, teaching fitness classes to suburban mothers who had no idea they were learning from a former world champion. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had become exactly what she had once mocked, working in a community-level facility, struggling financially, depending on the goodwill of people who didn't care about her former status or achievements. On the small television mounted in the corner of her cramped living room, Storm Adelic spoke with the grace and wisdom that Ashley had never possessed even at the height of her success. There was no gloating, no mention of their infamous encounter, just a focused discussion of goals that extended far beyond personal glory. "I want to thank everyone who believed in me," Kemi said into the microphone cluster. her voice carrying to millions of viewers worldwide, including those who didn't believe in me, because doubt can be just as powerful a motivator as support when you channel it correctly. She paused, looking directly into the main camera with an intensity that seemed to reach through the screen. To anyone who has been told they don't belong, who has been judged by their accent, their background, or the circumstances they were born into, you are enough. You have always been enough. Sometimes you just need to find your storm and learn to dance with it instead of running from it. Ashley turned off the television and sat in her empty apartment, finally beginning to understand the difference between being feared and being respected, between dominating others and elevating yourself, between winning fights and building legacies. 5 years after that fateful afternoon in Beverly Hills, the world of boxing had been fundamentally transformed. Elite performance boxing had become a pilgrimage site for young fighters from around the globe, all hoping to train where Storm Adelic had announced herself to the world. The Storm Foundation had grown into a global organization with facilities on 4 continents, having provided training and educational opportunities to over 3,000 young people. But its impact couldn't be measured solely in numbers. It had changed the culture of combat sports, proving that competition could be fierce without being cruel, that champions could be humble without being weak. Storm herself had found the peace she had always sought, though it came through embracing rather than avoiding her destiny as a symbol. She split her time between Nigeria and the United States, developing young fighters while pursuing a degree in international relations, preparing for a different kind of fight, one waged in boardrooms and policy discussions rather than boxing rings. Ashley Cromwell had completed her transformation as well, becoming one of the most effective advocates for sportsmanship and anti-bullying initiatives in professional athletics. Her story of redemption from arrogant champion to humble teacher resonated with audiences who understood that everyone deserves a second chance when they're willing to do the work to earn it. During a charity exhibition held at Elite Performance Boxing to celebrate the 5th anniversary of their encounter, the 2 women shared a ring one final time, not as enemies or even rivals, but as partners in a demonstration that showed young fighters how skill and respect could coexist. "Thank you," Ashley said to Storm as they embraced after their exhibition rounds, her voice carrying genuine gratitude for the lesson that had saved her from becoming someone she wouldn't have been able to live with. "Thank you for giving me the chance to become who I was always meant to be," Storm replied, understanding that some of life's greatest gifts come disguised as challenges, that sometimes the people who oppose us most strongly are the ones who force us to discover our true strength. As the crowd applauded and cameras captured their embrace, both women understood that their story had transcended sport entirely. It had become a parable about the power of dignity over degradation, character over cruelty, authentic strength over artificial superiority. And in boxing gyms around the world, young fighters continued to train with a new understanding that the goal wasn't to destroy opponents, but to reveal their own potential. That true champions were measured not by whom they defeated, but by whom they elevated. That the most lasting victories were those that made the world better for having witnessed them. The storm had passed, but its impact would ripple through generations, teaching anyone willing to listen that sometimes the most powerful response to being underestimated isn't anger or revenge. It's the quiet confidence to prove, through actions rather than words, exactly who you've always been beneath the surface. Because real champions aren't made in moments of triumph. They're forged in moments of pressure, when they choose dignity over destruction, grace over grudges, and strength over supremacy. And sometimes, if the world is very fortunate, they remind all of us what it truly means to be not just victorious, but worthy of victory.